For the vast majority of history, a criminal's confession was considered gold in the court of law. That singular statement could trump all other pieces of evidence. This firmly held belief in the value of a confession paved the way for some of the Middle Ages' most famously cruel methods of interrogation. The heretic's fork, for instance, would keep its victim suspended upright, unable to move without excruciating pain, just to extract a confession. The rack was a metal frame equipped with chains designed to stretch you apart until you confessed. At that point, you tell your torturer what they want to hear, regardless of whether or not it's true. Sounds barbaric, huh? Well, torture as a means of interrogation is now heavily frowned upon in our society, although it does still happen at the CIA's black sites, far from the public eye. But the false confessions it produces are still very much a problem in the world. And while modern-day interrogators aren't rolling out the good old-fashioned medieval torture devices, you'll find that the way that these confessions are extracted is still less than moral. Today, I will be focusing on how innocent people are coerced into confessing to crimes that they didn't commit, the shocking prevalence of these false confessions, as well as how they're even allowed to happen, and lastly, what the United States criminal justice system needs to change in order to fix this. False confessions have only begun to gain attention in relatively recent years. The Innocence Project, an organization founded in 1992 that is committed to addressing and preventing wrongful criminal convictions, reports that 25% of those ultimately exonerated from crimes had initially confessed to committing them. This makes wrongful confessions a leading cause of wrongful convictions. But that percentage is actually only out of the nearly 400 cases in the past 30 years that have actually been overturned. The reason that number is so low is because in order to dispute a decision based on a confession, the only thing we can turn to is the thing that technology has made us value more than a confession: DNA evidence. But many cases don't have any DNA evidence to analyze, making them incredibly difficult to appeal and overturn. A study published by the Criminal Law Bulletin estimates that the actual number of people that are wrongfully convicted per year is closer to 10,000. 25% of that means that 2,000 false confessions are given annually. And with the current prison population of 2 million, the Department of Justice estimates that 10% are innocent. This means that there are 50,000 people serving sentences for crimes that they didn't commit and falsely confessed to right now as we speak. Furthermore, a disproportionate amount of these confessions were given by racial minorities, juveniles, those with a mental disorder, or those with a significantly low IQ. One instance that perfectly demonstrates this phenomenon is that of the Central Park jogger case, which has only recently been popularized by the 2012 documentary The Central Park Five and the 2019 Netflix original When They See Us. The case concerns the 1989 assault and rape of a 28-year-old woman jogging in Central Park, New York. In response to this, police accused and coercively interrogated 5 Black and Hispanic teenagers between the ages of 14 and 16. Within hours, all 5 of them confessed to having committed the crime. Now, despite the fact that their separate stories didn't match up whatsoever, and the fact that the semen sample did not contain any of their DNA, but instead that of an unknown man, all 5 of them were convicted. Weeks later, they recanted their confessions, but to no avail. It wouldn't be until 2002 that a serial rapist and murderer serving a life sentence at the time would come forward and claim responsibility, with the evidence confirming his guilt. The 5 were finally exonerated in 2014, after having wasted between 7 and 13 years each in prison. Now I will address the burning question. Why would someone confess to a crime that they know they didn't commit? Well, sometimes it happens voluntarily. The suspect may recognize that pleading guilty to a crime may result in more lenient sentencing. For example, women tried in the infamous Salem witch trials knew that if they confessed to partaking in witchcraft, they might be spared from execution. In other cases, the suspect might have personal reasons for confessing. For example, in the movie Legally Blonde, Brooke Taylor Wyndham confesses to killing her husband, as sharing her alibi would mean admitting she was out getting a liposuction at the time of his murder. This would destroy his reputation as a well-known fitness instructor. But the injustice lies in the false confessions that are induced involuntarily. For one thing, interrogation rooms are designed to make the suspects feel stressed and uncomfortable, and after spending hours upon hours in one, they may just succumb to fatigue and confess. But that's not the worst of it. You see, police are known to employ highly coercive methods of interrogation, one of which is the confrontational and controversial Reid technique, which is described in depth in an article by The New Yorker published on December 3, 2013. This technique advises interrogators to lie about the evidence being presented against a suspect to make it seem like there is damning proof against them. The interrogator will then prod the suspect towards confessing by silencing their denials and rationalizing the crime for them. Once they've persuaded the suspect to confess, the interrogator helps them write out a detailed, fully fleshed out confession by offering them options to choose from, like guiding them through a multiple choice survey. Despite the Reid technique's blatant immorality and tendency to evoke false confessions, John E. Reid's company, John E. Reid's Associates Incorporated, trains more interrogators than any other company in the world and boasts a garish 80% success rate. One example of the Reid technique succeeding in fulfilling its evil purpose is the story of Martin Tankleff, a 17-year-old boy who one day found his mother dead and his father brutally attacked and called 911. When police took him in for questioning, they told him that they had found his hair in his dead mother's fingers and that his father had claimed that he was the one who attacked them. These were both lies, of course. Martin knew he was innocent, but by putting him through intense mental strain for hours on end, the police were able to convince him that he had actually, in fact, committed the crime, blacked out and committed the crime. Martin confessed and was sentenced to 50 years in prison. The conviction was overturned after 18 long years of them. So, how does the Reid technique work exactly? Well, it works by taking advantage of what's called the suspect's suggestibility, which is defined as how compliant their mind is to accepting suggestions implanted by others. It does this by filling in lapses in their memory with false information in order to fit those suggestions and make the suspect believe, as Martin did, that they truly committed the crime. I mentioned earlier that juveniles, the mentally ill, and the mentally handicapped are the most likely to give false confessions. This is because these people are highly suggestible, a trait that makes them especially vulnerable to coercive interrogation. This suggestibility can actually be measured using what's called the Good-Johnson Suggestibility Scale, which was created by Gisli Hannes Good-Johnson in 1983. It's computed based on a psychological test in which participants are asked to recall details of a short story. In 2014, in a study published by the International Journal of Law and Psychiatry, this test was administered to 40 Portuguese inmates. When compared to the scores that the general public got on the scale, the inmates' scores were much, much higher, proving that prisoners tend to be suggestible people. It seems that instead of having a functioning criminal justice system, we just have a hierarchy of suggestibility. Now, when I first learned about all this, I wondered how it could possibly be legal, and then I realized that it isn't. The Fifth Amendment to the Constitution grants us our Miranda rights, or our protection from self-incrimination. What this means is that involuntary confessions are not admissible into court. The problem is, there's just no good way to tell whether or not a confession was voluntary. Video recording of interrogations offers one solution that would let others pass judgment on the process, but only 25 states nationwide require police to record their interrogations. Passing legislation that would make this mandatory nationwide is an excellent first step to combating the false confession crisis and holding law enforcement accountable. Because as of right now, the only thing holding them accountable are the civil lawsuits that are filed against them after false confessions become overturned. But even better would be to address the root of the problem, the coercive interrogation itself. Lying about evidence to a suspect, a key part of the Reid technique, is already illegal in several countries and is under serious scrutiny by the American Psychological Association. Eliminating this in the United States is the ethical thing to do, and while it won't solve the whole problem, it is a step in the right direction, because coercive interrogation needs to be put to an end. It's immoral, takes advantage of the disadvantaged, and strips people of their fundamental rights to due process. As a society, we need to move past the archaic practice of chasing after the hazy confessions that were glorified in the Middle Ages, and instead rely on the concrete, factual evidence that we now have the technology to find. We've abandoned the barbarism of medieval torture devices. Now let's abandon the barbarism of coercive interrogation. Thank you.